Hello, and welcome to this training on supporting the well-being of pupils during summer camps. My name is Michelle McCarthy. I'm the Senior Educational Psychologist based in NEPS Roscommon. Thank you for joining me for this webinar, and I hope it'll be helpful to you in planning for your camps. I know that during the year as teachers, there's lots that you do to support the well-being of your pupils, and I'm going to talk to you about activities that will support well-being during your summer camp. This webinar aims to help you to understand how to promote well-being in summer camp by applying the Hopfall principles that you're probably very familiar with now of safety, calm, connectedness, self-efficacy, and hope, and by developing a better understanding of stress in children and how to respond to this in a positive and supportive way. In this webinar, I will also outline ways to support our international children to access camp activities. We will also look at how stress impacts behaviour, learning and well-being, how to respond and interact with a child whose stress response system has been activated, and how to reflect on and manage your own stress when working with children. This is a reminder of the summer camp principles and domains, which you will have seen in the summer camp documentation. They are learner outcomes, playful learning experiences, varied learning environments, and camp management. And as you can see in the overarching principles there, the last one is the development of the pupil's sense of well-being and belonging and how central they are to the camp. So it's hoped that this webinar will help you to meet this principle. So what do we mean by well-being? Well, well-being is a dynamic, fluid process that needs constant nurturing throughout life. We know that our well-being can vary, and that we go through periods where our well-being is more fragile, and there are times where it is very robust. And while we all have a personal understanding of well-being, a shared definition can be useful to facilitate a shared understanding within the school context. So this definition here is taken from the Wellbeing Policy Statement and Framework for Practice in 2019. So well-being is not just the absence of stresses in life. Well-being is present when a person realizes their potential, is resilient in dealing with the normal stresses of their life, take care of their physical well-being, and have a sense of purpose, connection, and belonging to a wider community. It's a fluid way of being, and it needs nurturing throughout life. We can all have our own version of well-being, but models and guidance can help us to apply this. So if we look at this multi-component approach here on the slide, it represents the different components of school life. So it might be helpful for us to have a look at this and see how we can map well-being onto these different areas. So the approach is a whole school approach, and it ensures better well-being outcomes for all. It ensures that the messages across school life are consistent and helps embed the practices that reduce stress and nurture well-being. The areas of school life that research shows are important to consider are culture and environment, curriculum, teaching and learning, relationships and partnerships, and policy and planning. Schools make a huge difference in children's lives, and we are so aware of that. The research tells us that schools are well placed to nurture well-being, as there are many protective factors within schools that help to minimize stress. And this slide here illustrates some important school protective factors, which include good home-school connections, sense of belonging, staff well-being and peer support, inclusion, positive relationships, classroom management, and social and emotional learning. So schools are becoming even more important for children, especially when their community or families are impacted by stress, including those displaced by war. An increasing number of children with English as another language are participating in our summer camps, and this is great news. Now, they will require some accommodations so they can access and engage with the activities. So these are some suggestions here that you might well be aware of. So make sure that you have iPads on hand for the use of digital translation tools. Mix groups so that there are children who speak common languages and those who have English as their first language. Use visual cues, for example, toilet break cards, and introduce key vocabulary in the different languages. Model tasks so they know exactly what to do, and check and include their interests in the summer camp program so that they can show their mastery. This is a visual representation of Hopfall, And Hopfall and his colleagues identified the psychosocial principles of safety, calm, connectedness, efficacy, and hope to support recovery for those impacted by trauma. But they also work to build resilience. The order of these principles is not prescriptive. In fact, they're interrelated. And the focus in this training is on supporting the well-being of children in summer camps. And we suggest that in the summer camp, you try to have activities that are linked to these principles. Remember, adopting approaches that promote one principle will have a ripple effect on the other principles. So, for example, helping children to feel safe will deactivate the stress response and help them to feel calm. Feeling safe will help them to trust, which will develop their relationship, thereby promoting a sense of connection. And it's within the context of a trusting relationship that children learn the skills needed to cope, and this promotes their sense of efficacy. And when children believe that they have the skills to cope, hope flourishes. And on the next few slides, I'm going to go through each of the principles, what they are, and some ideas of how to promote them in summer camp. Many of the activities I refer to can be found in the NEPS Return to School Post-COVID Toolkit, and that can be found on the Padlet on gov.ie and is on the Summer Camp Resources Padlet. So let's start with the sense of safety, because that's essential and a foundation for everything else. So safety is the belief that our needs will be met and that we and others that we care about will be protected now and in the future. When we don't have this sense, it adds to the stress load, and that takes away from our capacity to engage and enjoy. Feeling safe is the foundation of well-being because the development of connecting, supportive relationships and coping skills occur within this context. Our sense of safety, either physical or psychological, can be challenged when normal routines are disrupted and when people that provide a sense of safety are unavailable. So how can we ensure that children in summer camp know they are safe? Well, we can make sure that you do a walk through the school, showing the routes to the toilets, where and when they will eat, exits, play areas, and making sure they're generally familiar with the layout. Develop camp rules with the children and make sure that they contribute to it and that they are displayed somewhere where they can refer to them regularly. Explain the camp timetable because it will differ from the school day timetable, and they need to be aware of that as well. A sense of calm arises when our nervous system is in balance, and the ability to calm ourselves and self-regulate is a fundamental element of well-being. It involves an interplay of complex skills, including awareness of and ability to communicate our emotional state and the ability to self-soothe when dysregulated. So how can we help children to develop a sense of calm? Well, simple breathing activities such as square breathing and mindful movement activities can be helpful here. Grounding techniques can also be really helpful to help the child to kind of settle themselves and feel as if they can engage fully with the activities. Having a sense of connectedness means having relationships with others who understand and support us. It involves feeling valued, respected, cared for, included, needed, and acknowledged as a unique individual. Feeling connected is fundamental to well-being as it promotes a sense of belonging. It fuels self-efficacy and hope, and it supports us to feel calm and safe. When children feel connected and have a sense of belonging, they are more likely to engage in school life, which improves educational outcomes and serves as a protective factor for mental health. So how can we ensure that they have a sense of connectedness? Well, welcome the child by name every day, which is something I'm sure you do anyway, but it's just to put that little bit of emphasis on it. Use icebreakers to find out more about their likes, their dislikes, and their interests. And again, remember for the children with EAL that you may have to provide some digital tools to enable them to do this. Think about group activities where they have to collaborate towards an end goal. A treasure hunt is an example of this, and it can be great fun. Think about developing a camp song. You can use a general melody that you're familiar with and just write the lyrics as a group. Think about random acts of kindness and encourage them throughout the day, and then perhaps have a time where you talk about what random acts of kindness the children have performed and how they were received. So as I said, the way you get to know the child or the young person and develop a relationship with them will differ depending upon their language needs and perhaps their special educational needs. So you may have to use things like translation apps, language mats, visual supports such as talking mats or visual choice boards, and provide opportunities for them to interact with you, maybe in a one-to-one setting. You may wish to refer to person-centered communication supports or intensive interaction strategies. Hope is a personal experience and it can be challenging to define, but the essence of hope is the belief that things will get better. Hope helps us to remain committed to our goals and motivated to take action towards achieving them. It gives us a reason to persevere through unpredictable and challenging times. However, without the skills to manage challenges or achieve goals, hope can be lost. So how can we encourage a sense of hope among some of our children in the summer camps? Well, you can get them to make hope clouds, where they draw a little cloud on a piece of cardboard and write down what their hope is, maybe for the summer camp, maybe for the day, because it's important to take short-term and achievable goals. Think about developing a gratitude journal that they can complete and list what has gone well for them, what they have enjoyed, and what they're grateful for. Think about writing a letter to the future self, that at the end of the summer camp, they will have felt that they have achieved a particular goal or had fun or made a new friend, or very realistic and small things like that. And by engaging with hopeful and narrative stories throughout the camp, so positive uplifting resources, stories from books, YouTube videos, and so on, this can really help to develop a sense of hope in the future. Self-efficacy is the belief that we can do what we need to do to deal with challenges and to handle tough times. So this involves having the skills needed to achieve success and the belief in our ability to succeed. So belief in itself is not enough. We need the skills too. And self-efficacy is the sense that our actions are likely to lead to generally positive outcomes. So it can give us a sense of empowerment, purpose, optimism, and hope, all of which protect and promote well-being. Children who have a sense of self-efficacy are more likely to take the initiative and actively participate in school. So how can we do this? We can use problem-solving activities, collaborative learning activities, self-affirmations, positive self-talk, and a compliment circle. Completing the camp journal will also help the children to see what they have achieved. And this can be really useful as well. So 2 areas that are foundational in developing a sense of self-efficacy for students who may have additional needs are supporting communication and promoting independence. So we'll take a closer look at these now. It might be tricky to figure out if pupils' communication needs are due to their lack of proficiency with the English language or general speech and language issues. Gather information from parents, caregivers regarding any communication supports that pupils may have accessed when they were in their other countries, for example, and how they generally communicate their needs. Pupils who are pre-verbal should have access to alternative communication systems, for example, PECS books, augmentative and alternative communication, maybe iPad devices, and so on. If it's unclear what level of visual support to be using, then bear in mind the visual support hierarchy from the most concrete to the most abstract. So real objects are the most concrete and easiest to understand. So miniatures of real objects, for example, can be useful. And then photographs of actual objects or symbols or line drawings, and then the written word. So if you're in doubt about anything, use real objects to support your communication where possible. So holding up a book or a coat or a water bottle or a particular play activity can be the most effective. If you feel that the pupil is presenting with significant language and communication needs, you might find it helpful to look at the relevant sections of the Autism Good Practice Guide. And I suppose also spend some time just generally observing pupils and try to familiarize yourself with how they like to communicate, what their vocalizations are, what their likes and dislikes are. So there are some general tips. So having looked at the psychosocial principles of safety, calm, connectedness, efficacy, and hope that support recovery and build resilience in those impacted by trauma, let's take a closer look at stress itself and how it manifests in the child in the classroom, how it affects their thinking, learning, and behavior, and most importantly, how you can respond to it in a positive and a supportive way. So if we reflect for a minute and just think about what might make a child or a young person vulnerable to experiencing stress, you'll have lots of examples from your own experience. And I'm just suggesting some examples here, like their experience of displacement or war, or perhaps things like adversity in the home, poverty, domestic violence, those kind of things, they can all make them more vulnerable to experiencing stress. Now, that's not to say that every child that will be attending your camp will have those sources of stress. We're not saying that at all, but just to be aware and to think about that some people have particular contexts that have created situations for them that cause them to experience stress. And what do we mean by stress? Well, it's the body's reaction to demands. And if your body has the capacity to respond to it, then the stress is not experienced as very serious. If you don't have the capacity to respond, then it is quite difficult or toxic. So it's a normal part of life. That's the first thing to say. We're all familiar with daily stressors, such as trying to meet deadlines, being stuck in traffic, juggling work and family needs. And we want the summer camp to be enjoyable and that the demands of the situation are in line with the ability to meet the demands. So stress can cause physiological changes to allow the body to combat a stressful situation. And this is called stress response and is more commonly known as the fight or flight response. When stress is temporary, it can be positive. It keeps us alert, motivated, and ready to meet demands or avoid danger. Exposure to manageable stress within the context of a supportive relationship builds resilience. However, stress becomes negative when a person faces either a huge stressful situation like a war or a series of continuous stressful challenges in their society, community, family, or school, which is beyond their coping abilities, and without access to supportive relationships, it's really difficult to manage this. When faced with such stress, the stress response system can be activated for prolonged periods or even permanently, and this impacts negatively on health, well-being, and behaviour. Because there can be positive and negative aspects to experiencing stress, it can be helpful to view stress as a continuum. And this helps us to understand the full range of stressful experiences and their impact. So the stress continuum, as you can see here, has 3 categories: positive stress, tolerable stress, and toxic stress. So positive stress is normal and it's an essential part of healthy development. Things such as the first day back at school, or maybe the first few hours of starting summer camp, sitting in an exam, anything like that, that can trigger a stress response. And that brings about brief increases in heart rate and mild elevations in hormone levels. And when this stress is experienced in the context of supportive relationships and a safe environment, the body quickly returns to a state of calm and the child learns that stress can be managed. This successful outcome builds resilience, which improves the ability to cope with future stressors. So tolerable stress occurs when events are more challenging. For example, divorce or a frightening car accident. But again, if these events are experienced in the context of supportive relationships and safe environments, that facilitates adaptive coping. The child is protected from what could have been a very negatively impactful experience. Toxic stress then, on the other hand, occurs when strong, frequent, or prolonged adversity is experienced, such as abuse, neglect, mental illness, or exposure to violence and war. If relationships are unresponsive, unhelpful, or even threatening, the stress response remains activated for long periods of time. And when this type of ongoing stress is experienced without support, the stress response system can become permanently activated. And this heightened state of arousal makes it difficult to learn, to make and maintain relationships, and it takes a cumulative toll on physical and mental health into adulthood. However, research indicates that supportive, responsive relationships can prevent, buffer against, and reverse the damaging effects of toxic stress. Be mindful that the same event can trigger different reactions in people. So when acting as a supportive adult, it is important to focus on the child's experience of the event rather than the event itself. Toxic stress negatively impacts the development of brain architecture, the nervous system, and the endocrine system. So stress impacts on the brain architecture by disrupting the development of a number of processes, including cognitive flexibility, the ability to anticipate consequences, memory and attention, language, motivation and reward systems, and the stress response system. So early prolonged exposure to stress and adversity impacts the nervous system by increasing the sensitivity of the stress response system, meaning that children might feel unsafe even when no threat exists. Toxic stress also impacts on the endocrine system, which is responsible for hormonal balance. It leads to elevation of stress hormones such as cortisol, which can lead to health conditions such as obesity, diabetes, and chronic heart conditions. So in order to fully understand how stress affects us, It can be helpful to look at the areas of the brain involved. And Dr. Dan Siegel and Dr. Tina Payne-Bryson created a concept of the upstairs-downstairs brain, which can help us to understand this better. And it uses the analogy of a two-story house. So the downstairs brain is the more primitive area of our brain, and it focuses on survival. Basic functions like breathing, strong emotions, and innate reactions to danger are housed here. It comprises of the brain stem and the limbic system. A structure called the amygdala acts like an alarm system, with sensors processing information and determining if a threat or a danger exists. And if so, it activates the stress response system. The upstairs brain, or the thinking brain, is responsible for reasoning, planning, problem solving, making meaning of our experiences, building relationships, and regulating our emotions and our behaviors. The upstairs brain helps us to regulate the more impulsive, reactive downstairs brain. And when faced with a threat, it helps us to decide whether we are actually in a danger. And it also helps us to return to a state of calm after the threat has passed. The human brain is not fully mature until about 25 years of age. So this can explain why children and young people can have impulsive behaviors without anticipating the consequences, and why they need support in thinking about consequences. When a child is presented with stress beyond their current capacity to cope, the survival part of the brain becomes agitated. It starts to dominate, and the staircase to the upstairs brain becomes blocked. The stress response system is now activated, and the thinking part of the brain can now be accessed. Cannot be accessed, actually, and the focus is on survival. So when we're in this state, learning cannot take place, and conversations about behavior and reprimands are futile. So children who have experienced an acute traumatic event, such as the war in Ukraine, may well have a typically developed stress response system, but it might be highly, highly sensitive at this time. So there's many factors that will determine how long this stage will last, such as previous vulnerabilities, the extent of exposure to stress, the availability of supportive adults at home and in school, and the nature of their journey to Ireland, for example. All of those things will play a part. Dr. Dan Siegel developed the hand model, and this demonstrates the function of the different parts of the brain, which I've just outlined, and the importance of the integration of those different parts in managing stress and protecting well-being. The hand model helps us to understand how the brain operates when the stress response is activated, and it can be a useful model to use with children to explain to them, when calm, what is happening when they become agitated, and they usually find this quite easily to grasp. Here, the wrist represents the spinal cord, a connection point between the brain and the body, and the base of the hand represents the brainstem, which is responsible for basic functions like breathing, digestion, and the stress response. The limbic region is represented by the thumb, and that's responsible for emotions and memory, and it's where the alarm system is housed. The fingers represent the cortex, which is responsible for higher order thinking and reasoning. And the prefrontal cortex is represented by the knuckles nearest the nails, and it's responsible for integration of the different parts of the brain. So this integration is represented by the fingers being wrapped around the thumb. And integration results in a calm brain where we can think and we can reason and we can deal with stress. The image of the fingers held upright represents a brain that isn't integrated, where the person has flipped the lid, in other words, and the stress response has been activated. This model can be a useful tool in helping in school and helping children to understand when their stress response is activated. And sometimes it can be, if you have taught them this, to even do this much helps them to illustrate that they have flipped their lid and they're now dysregulated, and that what you're aiming for is to kind of close down that lid and to deactivate the stress response. So it can be useful to spend a bit of time teaching this. The fight-flight response can be accompanied by strong emotions such as fear and anger, and behaviors such as aggression or running away, escape. When the fight-flight option is not available, though, or the threat is so severe that nothing can be done to avoid it, Porges explains how a freeze-faint response is activated, and this response also denies access to the upstairs thinking brain. The freeze response is associated with the emotion of fear, and the accompanying behaviors may include appearing disinterested, appearing as if in a daydream, confused, or struggling to move through a task. The faint response is associated with the emotion of guilt, and the accompanying behaviors can include withdrawal, compliance, passivity, or resignation. An understanding of behaviours associated with the faint freeze response helps us to understand behaviours that could otherwise be misunderstood as lazy, inattentive, unmotivated, or uncurious. And we can be more supportive then because we understand that this is not a defiance or a bold behaviour. Understanding the unconscious and automatic nature of the stress response is crucial for adults because it reminds us that the behaviour isn't deliberate, but it's an effort by the child to try and stay safe based on their previous experiences. So to further understand the stress response system and the associated behaviour, we can look at Dr. Dan Siegel's ideas around the window of tolerance. He uses this model to describe the zone of arousal in which a person is able to engage in learning and function most effectively. It's in this zone that we can learn, play, relate to others, and manage emotions. When demands or perceived demands exceed the capacity or the perceived capacity to cope, we move outside our window of tolerance and we may become hyper or hypo-aroused. So hyperarousal results from the fight or flight stress response. It's accompanied by excessive arousal and energy, and the physiological signs may include a racing heart, a reduced appetite, sweating, shaking, and muscles that are ready to run or to fight. The emotional experience may include feeling anxious, fearful, or overwhelmed. And behaviours may also include emotional or abusive outbursts, aggression, impulsive behaviour, avoidance, or running away. Escape behaviours, essentially. Hypoarousal results from the freeze-faint stress response, and it's accompanied by shutting down or dissociative behaviour. The physiological signs may include a slowing down of the heart rate and breathing. The emotional experience may include fear, a sense of disconnection or numbness, and behaviours may include appearing exhausted, flat affect, being very quiet, zoning out, or being forgetful. The size of our window can change from day to day, and we can all be moved outside of our window of tolerance, becoming either hyper or hypo-aroused. And this is normal. But some children may have a shortened window of tolerance due to a variety of reasons, and may therefore struggle to manage what might be considered tolerable stress, such as instruction from an adult or changing from one activity to another. When the needs of children are known, we can anticipate when their stress response might be activated, but it's harder to anticipate when the stress response of children is activated when their needs are unknown to you. So children with hidden needs are vulnerable to stress because it is difficult to anticipate how best to support them. However, children's behaviour can be a clue that they have hidden needs, including those arising from attachment and trauma and adversity in their experiences. We mention behaviours not to contribute to a diagnosis, but to alert the fact that the behaviour might be communicating a need of some sort. So when we're trying to understand behaviour, it's helpful to spend time considering the following key questions. What is the behaviour communicating? What environmental stressors or triggers have caused the behaviour? Can they be eliminated? Can they be reduced or avoided entirely? What skills does the child need to develop a better way of coping in school? What additional learning opportunities can be put in place to develop these skills? So it might be some breathing, it might be some movement breaks, it might be some taking some time out to do a preferred activity, or some sensory activities that are known to regulate the child. Those are the kind of things that you could incorporate. And you can incorporate them as part of the camp into the daily activities for all children. The most important piece, however, is relationships, and they are the cornerstone of enjoyable learning experiences. So think about how to connect and to help the children to connect with their peers. As we talked earlier, as we spoke about engaging with children by greeting them in the morning and having structured group work, being explicit about the format of the group work and who's contributing what, and checking in and checking out throughout the day, just to make sure that the children are happy with the activities and they feel that they're doing okay. Maybe even suggesting one happy thing by the end of the day so that it gives them something positive to focus on and to bridge towards the next day of camp activities. Now, children who have been impacted by a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events indeed may also present with an impaired stress response system. And a traumatic event is an event that is perceived by the individual as extremely frightening, harmful, or threatening. And these events can range from a one-time incident to a series of incidents. So, for example, a car accident, the death of a family member, abuse, neglect, or chronic bullying. Trauma is the emotional, psychological, and physiological impact of the heightened levels of stress that accompany the experiences of the traumatic event. Not all children who experience a traumatic event are traumatized by the event, however. The impact is influenced by a number of factors, and the more persistent or acute the traumatic event is, and the more pervasive other risk factors are in the child's life, the greater the impact of that event on the child. So when we're traumatized, we struggle to believe that the world is a safe place, that other people can be trusted, and that we're worthy of care and protection. When children experience a single traumatic event and they have the support of a caring adult, they will have greater capacity to cope and to recover. Trauma can have a profound effect on social, emotional, and cognitive functioning. It can impair the stress response system, reducing the ability to tolerate even ordinary stressors. It impacts on behaviour. Some behaviours that can be seen in the classroom may include difficulty forming and maintaining relationships, disengagement from learning, being disorganised, poor planning and decision-making, lack of intonation, and limited facial and emotional expression can also be present. Emotions may be expressed through externalizing behaviours such as angry outbursts, meltdowns, aggression, or through internalizing behaviours such as withdrawal or somatic complaints. We mention behaviours here again not to diagnose, but to highlight the importance of viewing behaviour as the communication of a need. Having a greater understanding of the behaviours that can be associated with trauma help us to notice or pick up on the hidden needs. So again, relationships are the cornerstone. They are the foundation, and they are what will make the child feel comfortable and safe in the environment. So I'll just invite you to look for a moment here at some of the things that we've discussed already, but some of the ways of developing relationships throughout the camp. So we've looked at some behaviours that indicate activation of the stress system. And now we're going to look at the 3 R's model, which can guide us how to respond and interact with a child whose stress response system has been activated. The first step in the response is regulate, and this involves helping a child to calm their stress responses by co-regulating with them or prompting them to use already developed skills. During this step, the adult offers comfort and reassurance. The second step in the sequence is relate, and this involves the adult tuning into the child, showing empathy and validating their feelings. This fuels connection, which helps the child to feel safe and secure. The third step is reason, and it involves supporting the child to reflect, to problem solve, and to plan for how to better manage a similar event in the future. And this is done when the child is calm. This model contends that regulating and then relating to a child is the most effective way of getting access to the reasoning part of the brain. When calm is restored, the child has access to the reasoning part of the brain, which enables problem-solving discussions to actually begin. For children who have experienced trauma and stress, your relationship and how you relate to children is your most important and powerful resource and permeates all your interactions with the children. The PACE model and the 3R model are examples of positive, attuned interactions. The 3R model shows us how to be with children when their stress response has been activated, but how we relate to them when they are calm is equally important. And in fact, the relationship is the most important tool in a trauma-informed approach. It is within those connected and attuned relationships that behavioral change occurs. Stress is reduced and children become available to learn. PACE is one example of a model to guide a connecting relationship. It stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And it was developed by Hughes and Balin, bringing lightness and fun into a relationship, separating the child from the behaviour while setting limits to the behaviour. Being curious about the child's perspective and being empathetic are all important elements of attuned relationships. It's stressful when working with children who have an activated stress response system. And here we're going to look at how stress can impact on us and how we can look at ways to reduce the impact. So first of all, I'm going to explain a little bit about mirror neurons, and they help us understand why some experiences can be more impactful on us than others. So neurons are brain cells, and they respond to information in the environment and stimulate action. There's a particular type of neuron that responds even when observing actions performed by others. These are known as mirror neurons, and they explain, for example, why spectators at a boxing match might sometimes punch at the air as if hitting the opponent. and why they might recoil physically when they see a violent blow to the head. Emotions are also imitated through mirror neurons, which is why we can feel tears well up when we see a loved one cry, smile when we see someone else smile, or why we wince when we see other people hurt. In this way, emotions can become contagious as we catch the emotions of those nearby. So we need also to be mindful of the unconscious messages children send through behaviour that stimulate our mirror neurons, as this can impact on us, reminding us of the importance of tending to self-care. On the other hand, adults can actively shape relationships with children by modelling positive body neurons, behaviours and emotions, which stimulate their mirror neurons. We now will have a look at the need for our own self-care. And this is another 3R model, but this one is for us as adults who work with children and have become dysregulated. So the first stage is to regulate, where we press the pause button and restore calm. And this pause allows time to acknowledge how we're feeling and to see if our stress response has become activated. And that'll be perfectly normal in highly stressful situations. So remember that. Use of positive self-talk, a statement or a breathing technique during this can induce calm. And during the pause, we can also consider if we need to seek assistance. Reflect occurs after the event when calm has been restored, and we set aside time to reflect on the incident, considering the following key areas: the communication need the behavior was communicating, what stressor in the environment might have triggered the behavior, what skills does the child need to develop and cope better in future, what was the impact of the incident on your relationship with the child and how might this be restored, and what was the impact on you personally. What self-care activity would be helpful for you right now? And the final R is maybe that self-care activity, which is relax. After a stressful event, it's important to find a way to recharge the batteries. Be kind to yourself, do something you enjoy, because behavioural change is slow. It's important to look after yourself as you support children to better manage their stress. Remember, your self-care is really important, and we talk about it a lot, and we don't do enough about it, in all honesty, especially given the nature of how demanding our work lives are in education now. So incorporating regular self-care into daily and weekly schedules offers respite for our bodies and our minds to recover from stressful events. The little and often approach to self-care prevents wear and tear, reduces the likelihood of developing long-term health consequences. Regular self-care also reduces the ripple effect of stress on our relationships, because if we're stressed, it does impact on those around us. Sometimes it can be helpful, though, to explore a situation that is concerning us with someone who is not a family member or a friend. So we'd like to remind you that Spectrum Life provides employee assistance support for school staff, their partners and children over the age of 18 living in the family home. It provides easy access to confidential counselling and assists with personal and work-related issues. The service provides advice to employees on a range of issues, including well-being, legal, financial, bereavement, conflict, and mediation matters. So I'd also like to direct or alert you to the NEPS developed training that explores the topics that I have touched upon here in greater depth. It is currently being offered through the ESCI website, so please ask your NEPS psychologist or contact your local NEPS office about dates in the new academic year, or you can go on to ESCI, ESCI, www.esci, and have a look there and see what the schedule is. Finally, I'd like to thank you for attending this training and taking the time out. Thank you for your commitment to meeting the wellbeing needs of the children that you work with, and your ongoing efforts to provide enriching developmental opportunities to all the children. So thank you very much for that.